clear.
Perfect, perfect. So I can see that we've got a couple of people starting to come into the room now. So just by way of introduction, my name is Chrissy. I am Head of Content and Community with Safe Events. And welcome to the second installment of this Event Insight series. Today we have Peter Dalton joining us. And Peter is going to be leading a session on counterterrorism and protective security planning for crowded space events. Now, we have a lot of content to get through in today's session, as you can imagine. So it will be a little longer than last week's. And because of that, we might have a slightly shorter Q&A session at the end. But if there are any questions that you have during the course of the session, feel free to pop them into the chat on the right. I can shout them out to Peter as we go along. And then towards the end, we might just have a couple of minutes quick Q&A session. So Peter, I'll hand it over to yourself.
Perfect. Thanks, Chrissy, and thanks for the invite. I can still see people are still joining, but I'll go to a screen share if that's okay, just while we wait. Okay, Chrissy, can you see my PowerPoint?
Yep, that's up there now.
Perfect. I'll just wait for a few more seconds and then just tell me when you think I should start actually talking and delivering.
Sure, no problem. We might just give it until the 1 minute past one. Obviously, people will have just kind of logged on there.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Just while we do that, ladies and gents, welcome aboard. We'll start talking and presenting soon. Chrissy's already mentioned, use the chat function. A general reminder, I can't see you, but you can see me. You can't see Chrissy either, so just bear with that. What I will do when it comes to getting you to interact is I'll make it quite clear via Chrissy to use the chat function, put your comments in there, just bullet point comments. Don't worry about spelling, format, grammar. Just put your stuff in there. Also, just before we start, if you could, just put where you're working from today, just so we can assess where you're all coming from around the world, or is it in Europe, or is it just the United Kingdom? But we'll look forward to seeing where you're coming. It will be an interactive session. Once we get started, there'll be obvious times to engage. A general reminder, you should have been told this is down for a 2-hour session because it's going to be part presentation and part, if you like, tabletop exercise or an introduction to tabletop exercises. So up to 2 hours. We appreciate fully that you may need to dive out or dive in. As Chrissy has said, these sessions are recorded. They will be stored on the Event Insights /Safer Events YouTube channel, so you can watch back, pause, and digest at your own leisure. How are we looking, Chrissy, for delegates now?
Yeah, I think it's about time you could start off. We've still got 1 or 2 popping on, but we're at a good number now.
Excellent. We'll make a start. So as you can see, hopefully you can see the screen. Make yourselves comfortable. I'm going to cover a session on security planning for publicly accessible locations using a situational case study that's based around the coronation of His Majesty the King and Her Majesty the Queen that takes place over this bank holiday weekend here in the United Kingdom. This will be a large event taking place all over the UK with events in cities, towns, squares, and street parties. So it's an ideal chance to look at protective security in the concept of the public domain. So that's what we're going to talk about for about 2 hours or so, including questions and answers. So just before I start, a little bit about me. My name's Pete Dalton. You can get my details on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and my email will pop up as part of a chat or as part of a presentation today. It's a real pleasure to be here. I also supported the events back in 2020 when we were locked down. And when Mark and the team asked for volunteers, always happy to talk and discuss crowded space and protective security issues. So I currently work in major sporting events, mainly MSE, as a protective security and crowded space consultant. Worked on events such as a Football World Cup, the Euros, international cricket, and events all around the world. And I operate across protective security. By that, I mean counter-terrorism and securing events, but also crowded space management, crowded space consultancy, and crowded space education. I've been a consultant for the last 3 years since leaving the police service. My main partners who I work with, first of all, Interpol, Project Stadia, and the National Centre for Spectator Sport Safety and Security, NCS4, which is an American USA/Interpol partnership. And through that, we deliver the International Sport Safety and Security training curriculum to police commanders from around the world. And so far, we've covered 60 countries and 130 commanders on that programme. And our next engagement should be in Saudi Arabia later this year. Also work extensively with Professor Chris Kemp from Mind Over Matter Consultancy. We deliver education, crowded space consultancy, crowded space management around the world on a number of projects and deliver, again, a comprehensive curriculum in all aspects of event management and event security. Consult for OnePlan, which is a well-known 2D/3D GIS interactive mapping planning system that's used by tens of thousands of clients around the world, from events from the World Cup down to street parties and anything in between. I consult for the Innovation Institute for Fan Experience, which is a USA body that seeks to look at events from the arena, if you like, or the lens of the guest, the customer, the spectator, which is really important. And I'll pick up on that again. I maintain my security clearance in the UK, and I work on a range of civil nuclear critical national infrastructure and civil nuclear sites, doing preparedness training, JSIP training, and a range of tabletop scenarios. And more recently, over the last month, I've started as a security risk consultant, providing advice and support to Securitas, which is an international protective security company that you may have heard of. Prior to that, I completed my 30 years of police and military service here in the UK. When I left, I was a chief inspector and I was a head of a department responsible for protective security of physical, personnel and technical measures for royal palaces and diplomatic residences in the Thames Valley Police area, so the south central area of the United Kingdom, running a department and planning large operations in that domain. I was a counter-terrorism security coordinator. We'll touch on that role later on. That role helps events and organisers to manage, minimise and mitigate counter-terrorism risk to events, and we still use those skills extensively. And I was a member of the Specialist Firearms Command Development Programme, which is a high level of accreditation for commanding large counter-terrorism and major event operations, such as a royal wedding in 2018, visits of President Trump, and large operations in the UK. And I held all the UK Police Command accreditations in public order, firearms, JSIP, CBRNE, and over a 20-year period, I've been involved in an advising capacity or a trainer, both in the UK and internationally. So in summary, a mixture of consultancy background and law enforcement, and prior to that, 5 years in the military. So with that in mind, today's objectives, we're going to develop a high-profile, publicly accessible location case study. Hopefully, that will support us all in understanding the ongoing terrorist threats to events. We'll touch on this briefly. We're going to have a look at considering integrated safety, security and service. I'll refer to that as S3, and I'll go through the international rationale and legal position as to why we do that. We will take a look at a high level, applying a protective security concept of operations and C4I, so that's your command, control, communication, coordination and intelligence. There will be a few of these 3-letter and 4-letter acronyms. If you miss one, put it in the chat and I'll shout it back to you in due course. I recognise in the security industry, just like other industries, we've got our own peculiar language and acronyms. A general shout out, pretty much 95% of the supporting materials are freely available. They're taken from open source websites, and I'll signpost the vast majority of them. I think there's only 1 or 2 items today that you'd actually have to pay for, but most of this content is entirely free if you know where to look for it. Continuing then, we're also going to take a look at developing a high-level, proportionate, flexible and scalable event safety management plan. No 2 plans are the same, whether it's at the same venue location, they're always different. And one of the key skills in safety, security and service is flexing most plans and making them unique to your own events. We're going to take a look at considering effective responses to reasonably foreseeable scenarios. And today, mainly, there'll be counter-terrorism and crowd management, all relatively simple, all things that you will have experienced before or you should be prepared for to deal with. And also we're going to look at understanding the difference between event management, which is generally event organizer, and private sector, and how that links into incident response, which is typically your blue light services, police, fire, ambulance, or in some parts of the world, military as well, how they work together and integrate, how they maintain interoperability, and how we translate between the two. And again, just to make a notion here that all of the scenarios are fictional. However, they are all consistent UK reasonably foreseeable scenarios and design basis threat assessments. Most of us will have dealt with these scenarios before. And if you haven't, they're the sort of things you should plan for. Very timely today too, I will also touch on the Terrorism Protection of Premises Draft Bill 2023 that was published yesterday. You may also know that as Martin's Law, or also as the Protect Duty. I'll summarise the ends of the session. I'll go into that and look ahead at some of the likely implications for us all. It's not going to be a Martin's Law or a Protect UK training session today because they don't exist at the moment, but I'll summarise and signpost to some of the key issues for you right at the end of the presentation, and I'm sure we'll have a discussion on that. So with that in mind, I'm going to get you talking via the chat just as a practice right now. I'm going to show you a slide here, and it contains some recent, starting from 2017, working forward to this year or last year, recent attacks in the UK. What I'm interested, just put in the chat function, if you will, if you recognise any of these counter-terrorism or terrorism attacks and what you know about them. And then I'll go through in sequence and cover the key details. And this is just to give us an understanding of what the threats are that are out there today. And Chrissy, I'll look for any fastest fingers, anybody shouting out a location or a date, and I can then summarise each of these in turn.
Yeah, no problem.
Do get involved, folks. Have a guess if you don't know. You can see the type of attacks. The pictures give a lot of these away, but just throw out a type of an attack or a location, and then we can chat these through.
So we have Ali here saying Westminster Bridge, Parsons Green, IED that didn't explode as intended. Simon here says the Manchester attack. We've got the London Bridge attack, Westminster Bridge, another London Bridge guess here. Palmer Green,
Fantastic.
IED.
So we've got most of these. I'll go for until we've got most. Just while I'm talking, see if anybody can identify the bottom right and the bottom centre. And I'll just make a start with the top left. So I think that was Ali. That's correct. That's Westminster Bridge. That was the 22nd of March 2017, the first of a number of attacks that year. That was Khalid Massoud in a hire vehicle driving south to north over Westminster Bridge in a hire vehicle. He drove onto the pavement, ploughed into pedestrians on Westminster Bridge. Many of you have been there. You've probably got selfies on that bridge. After he conducted the vehicle as a weapon attack, he decamped on foot carrying a knife, ran around to the front of the Houses of Parliament, where he tragically stabbed and killed a Metropolitan Police officer before he was engaged and shot by a close protection officer. That was the first attack of that year, a vehicle as a weapon layered with an edge weapon attack in an iconic location in the centre of London. And Khalid Massoud was inspired by Islamic extremism. He had rehearsed the attack and conducted hostile reconnaissance. Somebody mentioned the bottom left, which was good. That's Parsons Green, September 2017, the same year. That was a device that didn't operate. So what you can see on the left-hand side of that image is a bucket in a little carrier bag. The bucket contained a homemade explosive made up of triacetone triperoxide, TATP. That's a common homemade mixture, generally mixed together with readily available materials such as hydrogen peroxide, which you can get for your hair cleaning, acetone, which is a cleaning agent, and sulfuric acid. Mix those component parts together, which is basic chemistry, have a timer or means of initiation, have a shrapnel and substance, and you've got an explosive device. Hamid Hussein was an immigrant and mounted that attack. The attack didn't fully activate in so much as we got the flash but not the bang. And it hasn't been confirmed if that was the location in Parsons Green or if that train was going to go underground. In any case, if that had detonated properly, there'd have been far, far more fatalities in an enclosed vacuum of an underground carriage. So think back to 7/7/2005. Thankfully, the device didn't go off. It was made safe, and he was captured and arrested and convicted that year. So we had Manchester Arena. Won't labour that point. I think we all know that on the 22nd of May 2017, that was Salman Abedi detonated a suicide-born improvised explosive device inside the foyer or Zone X or grey space of Manchester Arena, killing 22 people, injuring hundreds more with an explosive device. And that led to a public inquiry and also led to Martin's Law Protect Duty, or the new legislation we'll come on to later on. We have one of the London Bridge attacks, so top centre, June the 3rd, 2017. This was 3 subjects, Kieran Butt, Youssef Zogpa and Rishis Redouane, inspired again by Islamic extremism. Their original target was to go to the West End of London. That hasn't been put in the public domain, the exact location, but it was somewhere in the West End. What's significant, though, for you and us to consider, June the 3rd was an iconic date in so much as it was the European Champions League final, and that was being held at Cardiff Stadium, and that was being watched by millions of people around the world. There was actually a terrorist attack disrupted, or a plot disrupted, in Cardiff that year, and this attack happened that night. They were going to target the West End. A high visibility policing operation deflected them, and they mounted attack on London Bridge, driving north to south, again onto the pavement, before they jumped out with knives that were strapped to their hands, ran into the Barrow and Boy pub, and then ran into Borough Market, killing 7 people before they were all shot and killed themselves by a rapid response from armed response vehicles. Interestingly, too, inside the vehicle there were a number of petrol bombs that would have been deployed at their original target. So again, vehicle edge weapons, laid attack methodology. We have got a few more. So the other London Bridge, which is centred towards your right, was November 2019. And that was Usman Khan, who had been released recently from prison. He'd been de-radicalised under the Prevent strategy, and he was going to a probation service meeting at Fishmongers Hall. Only snag in the script was he hadn't been de-radicalised, and he mounted a spontaneous knife attack before he was heroically restrained by people with narwhal tusks and self-defence, held to the ground before he was shot and killed by, again, a rapidly responding armed response vehicle from inside of London. So we've got 3 left. Chris, has anybody got the centre, bottom centre, or bottom right?
So we've had a few guesses here saying Streatham.
Yeah, excellent. Centre. I'll start with Streatham then. That's an interesting one. So the 2nd of February 2020, there'd been quite a lull. The subject here, again, had been released from prison very recently on the Friday. This is the Sunday it takes place. Prior to his release, it was flagged to the prison service and the criminal justice service that he presented an extremely high risk of engaging in terrorist activities, so much so that he was deployed under 24-hour covert armed surveillance, because the Police Service UK and the Counter-Terrorism Policing Network recognise the threat that Sadur Shaman posed to the public. He mounted an attack in Streatham High Street, which is unusual because unless you come from Streatham, Streatham isn't an iconic location. I apologise if anyone lives there. But the reason he did that, because he was on a tag, a GPS tag system that monitored his behaviour. In any case, released on the Friday, followed around, and on the Sunday afternoon, he purchased 2 knives, just started to mount a mass casualty attack, and was shot within seconds by armed response officers as part of the surveillance team, and again killed. So another subject there with an Islamic extremist worldview. Anyone got a bottom centre, Chrissy?
We had a few guesses for the Finsbury Park Mosque.
Okay, that's bottom right,
bottom
the white
right.
van, Darren Osborne. So far to date, we've covered Islamic extremism. Darren Osborne was an extreme right-wing terrorist who was frustrated and radicalised by his own worldview, hired a vehicle, drove to Finsbury Park. What people don't often know is Finsbury Park wasn't his original target. He was going to go and target a pro-Palestinian march in London, but again was deflected by a high-visibility policing operation. So changed axis and attacked Finsbury Park Mosque, killed one person before he was restrained and arrested and is currently in prison. The bottom one, bottom centre, Reading, in the home counties, June 2020. Kahira Sadala mounted a mass casualty stabbing attack in the park on a sunny Saturday evening in Reading, which is a nice location, targeting the LGBTQ community. He stabbed and killed 3 males in less than 10 seconds and then stabbed a further 3 before he was restrained by an unarmed police officer. Again, he'd served previous prison time for terrorist offences. He'd rehearsed those attacks. So a little montage of attacks there. Just jump forward quickly. Anybody recognise these last 3 attacks? And these are more recent. And we'll skitter through these quite quickly. Looking for the left-hand side first of all, Chrissy.
Okay, I'll let you know if we got any guesses.
Bottom right, I think people will get. I'm not sure that you'll get the top right, but anybody shout up for the left-hand side or the bottom right?
We have David MS.
Yeah, Right Honourable David Emmis. Emmis was an MP from the Conservative Party. Let's pick up on David while somebody else knocks off the bottom right for me. So this was a serving MP at his Friday constituency, which is a common ministerial practice, and he was targeted and killed by Ali Arbi Ali, a Islamic extremist who'd gone online, conducted extensive hostile reconnaissance, and I'll cover that term a little bit later on. But he targeted Sir David Amess based on his voting records on Syrian politics. He'd also looked at a number of other MPs, stabbed and killed Sir David before he was restrained by unarmed officers carrying a X2 taser and restrained, serving prison time. And the bottom right, has anybody picked up on this one?
We have Liverpool Hospital as a few guesses.
Thank you very much. So November the 14th, 2021 was Remembrance Sunday around the UK. And this is Edan Al-Swelmien, a UK, a national from abroad seeking immigration status in the UK, and detonated again a triacetone triperoxide explosive-based device, assumed it was a suicide device, but that wasn't the location inside that taxi, clearly, that he targeted. So there was a malfunction there that thankfully only killed him. The taxi driver in the white shirt managed to get out very, very quickly. Now, initially, everybody assumed he was targeting a major cathedral just around the corner, a short walk away from the maternity hospital. However, that's not quite so clear-cut for reasons I'll come on to a little bit later on. It's equally possible, or if not more likely now, that he was targeting the hospital itself or the maternity ward, which would have been a new depth of depravity by terrorists. And I'll come on to the reason for that in a little while as we go into our case study. Now, the top right, I don't think you'll get those. The right-hand side, you've got Hamid Hussein, who was convicted from Parsons Green. And on the left-hand side, you've got Hassan Abidi, the brother of Salman Abidi from the Manchester Arena attack. Those two side by side committed an act of terrorism in prison where they attacked and were planning to decapitate a prison guard inside a prison office. So it just goes to show that when these subjects are in prison, they're equally dangerous. And indeed, the prison and criminal justice sectors are currently holding a high number of terrorists who are not sadly being de-radicalised, who, when they come out, time and time again, continue to mount a terrorist attack or pose a threat. So we're just setting the attack methodology there for the UK. That leads me nicely into current UK threat environment and some data. All of this is freely available. There's nothing here that's official sensitive. So I'll go through the current scene. So first of all, for all of our events in public locations, venues or stadia, the threat of terrorism remains real and enduring. And in the UK at any one time, there are in the region of 800 counter-terrorism investigations. 800 counter-terrorism investigations. Amongst those, there are a number of subjects of interest. They are people who are on the radar at different levels of the security service or the counter-terrorism policing network. Now, cast your mind back to the Manchester Arena inquiry. So in the 22nd of May 2017, there were in the region of 23,000 subjects of interest in the UK. There are currently 40,000 plus subjects of interest in the UK, and they are prioritised by the counter-terrorism policing network and security services under levels P1, P2, P3, P4. All that information is online. You can take a look at that if you're interested. So out of the current investigations, about 80% are inspired by Islamic extremism. We have to be very, very clear and say the religion of Islam is not violent. What we're talking about is a warped ideology or a warped worldview where extremism applies. These are inspired plots, low complexity, low sophistication. When you come, or if you do a full counterterrorism course, we'll talk about the difference of enabled plots and directed plots, but the inspired are the low complexity, simple ones that you see more of. About 20% are extreme right wing, and that number is increasing of threats. And the example on the slide before was Darrell Osborne in the van at Finsbury Park Mosque, but we're seeing more of these taking place. There have been, since March 2022, 37 late stage plots. So late stage plots are plots that are ready to be activated from a terrorist point of view or a threat actor's point of view, or where the criminal justice service, police and counterterrorism have sufficient evidence to mount a serious prosecution that's going to lead to a lengthy period of imprisonment. So if you imagine that's 37 plots that were ready to be activated by terrorists or have met the evidential threshold for preparing acts of terrorism, it shows the level and pace and frequency of the threat in the UK. And whilst it may seem relatively quiet at the moment, this work goes on 24/7 around the clock, towns and cities all around the UK. The most likely attack methodologies are what we would call low complexity, low sophistication, involving edge weapons or knives, blunt trauma weapons, improvised explosive devices, either suicide-borne or placed, vehicle as a weapon, i.e. driving a vehicle into a crowd, firearms or fire as a weapon, or combinations of above. So we are less likely to see, audacious plots in the UK. We are less likely to see multiple subjects with assault rifles or planes crashing into towers. That's not to say that won't happen, but they are the less likely attack methodology at the moment, and it's the most likely reasonable worst case scenarios that feature for us in planning our events. So more data for you. I use Pool Reassurance. They do a yearly and a monthly update, but one I like to bring out here is 16% of arrests over the last year were under the age of 17, and these were arrests for serious offences. Many of these have led to prosecutions for lengthy periods of time. The youngest arrest and prosecution for an active viable terrorist offence is 12 years of age. So bear that in mind. Subjects 12 years and age plus are being convicted of serious terrorist attack planning, including plots to behead people in public playgrounds of schools. They are plots that have been disrupted. The age is coming down. So what that means is, tragically, the next time we see police officers engaging and neutralising subjects on the streets of the UK with firearms, when we shoot and kill somebody in plain speak, there's a good chance that person's going to be under 18. And just imagine the political, social, the justice dimension when that happens. So terrorists are getting younger as we progress with our threat picture. This document says the CPNI, but you'll notice now that the CPNI, who used to be called the Centre for Protection of National Infrastructure, have now moved to the National Protective Security Authority as of the other month. They produce a range of documents. They're one of our go-to sites. I highly recommend them. This particular document online goes through the type of the threats and how you can recognise them, which are key component parts of protective security planning. So signpost you towards the NPSA website, stick it on your home screen, take a look. There's fantastic guidance on there. So now we've set the scene for what the prevailing UK threat levels are. Hopefully I haven't scared anybody too much. We're now going to start to develop our scenario, and we're going to look ahead to what's happening this weekend, which is the coronation of His Majesty the King, Charles III, and Her Majesty Queen Camilla. And our host city for this, notionally, is going to be Leeds, which is a city in the north of the UK. I thought I'd take us out of London deliberately, not least of which because Leeds is a vibrant city, but also in common with many cities, it's got market squares, city squares, and large events. So our scenario today focuses on events in Leeds taking place this weekend. Our key schedule are planned public events in Millennium Square, which I'll show you in a second, which is a large, iconic public square, freely accessible in the centre of Leeds, and a planned capacity of up to 6,000 people. People will be there with express permission to go and attend the event. So that's key for you. There'll be a small military procession on this Saturday morning by local regiments, scouts, guides, and charities to the cathedral. And they're going to go and march to the cathedral and join VIPs. Now, a lot of cities this Saturday will be showing live screening of the coronation in their cathedrals, churches, and other public establishments. And this is quite a large one that will take place. There will be large VA and PA screens in the square showing the coronation and a range of community events on the Saturday, and a major concert on Sunday that's being broadcast live from Windsor Castle in Berkshire. But public viewing areas around the UK will be showing that, and it'll be a good thing to watch. There'll be attendance by members of Parliament. Double asterisk there, our local MP has been subject to terrorist threats online, so keep that in mind as we develop our threat assessments. But the particular local MP does not receive armed protection. So he has standard measures only, and a range of local dignitaries attending the event. There will be Commonwealth cultural events in the Millennium Square all through the weekend, and a beacon lighting ceremony on the Sunday. So what I'm saying to you here is, in our centre of our city of Leeds, we've got a range of locations that are quite closely confined together over a weekend. Chrissy, can you see that map?
Yep, that is up on the screen now.
So I'm showing you Google Maps Pro. You probably all use this system, but right in the centre you can see Millennium Square. You can see 100, 200 and 400 metre cordons. The relevance of those is in regard to security planning for IEDs. The cathedral is just where the icon is now, just to the southeast by about 100 metres from the Millennium Square. And then we've got the main building, which will be holding some VIP dinners. And then the train station, a major transport hub, is down to the south of the picture. So that's just setting the scene for you using Google Maps Pro of the location we'll be working in. And I'll give you a more detailed overview using a different mapping system as we go into the scenario. But just to set the scene for you, if you are sat there at home, go into Google Maps, look at Millennium Square, and then you can look at the mapping as we go through some of the scenarios. So a picture there, if you like, of a different events, cathedrals, crowded spaces. The picture on the bottom left is actually an event in Millennium Square. Millennium Square does host a number of large events, up to about 7,500 capacity, with screens and stalls and overlay, including music events. Cultural events bottom right, and right in the centre are stars of the show. And the top centre is what the beacon lighting ceremony looks like inside the Civic Hall, or just outside the Civic Hall, I should say, in Millennium Square. So that's the sort of imagery that we will be seeing, which takes us into the starting point in event management, event safety planning and crowded space planning and security is understanding the event. Now, the people who understand the event best generally are the event organisers. So what I'd like you to do now is just to identify how your own venues or events develops an event profile document or a crowd profile document, but also what key information is required for your events. And again, Chrissy, just shout out some of the content here. I've put the relevant content, so the purple guide that you can access online. This is one that you do have to pay for. It's £25 a year before tax, so £30 UK with tax. And this goes through a lot of the guidance on planning events. But what do you think you need to have? What information would you like as part of your event profile? And we'll just give you a few seconds to type and talk into the system.
Yeah, I'll let you know once we have something up here.
And just shout out, Chrissy, when you see commentary coming through.
So we have Ali coming in here with capacity demographic.
Excellent, thank you.
Benjamin, we have audience profile.
Good stuff, keep going.
We have another here for demographic. Entrance times.
Yeah, excellent.
We have the build and the D-rig.
Fantastic. We've got some technical event planners, de-rigging and load-ins and build-ups. Great to see. And just give me a few more if we've got them.
We have one here saying local news.
Yeah, local news. Okay, so I'll make a start. So this list is endless. And what I'd like to hope is that you have a consistent process at your venue, stadia, or events for capturing key information. And one of the go-to documents when we start in our event safety management planning cycle is to understand the event profile. So clearly the list, not exhaustive, exact location of the venue, stadium, or public space with detail, OSGR mapping, what 3 words, smart mapping systems, so the exact location and the type of venue, time, day, date, location of the event, not just the main, if you like, scheduled events, but also the load-in time, the build-up time, the event, the breakdown and the loadout. So those key phases. And for protective security, we talk in terms of layers, both in terms of space and time. What type of event it is, who the artists will be, what the times are, what the schedules are going to be, how the event is broadcast, the crowd profile, numbers, demographics, age, culture associated with the crowd, known events at that location, which is often missed. I threw a clue to you. Millennium Square hosts events. So why wouldn't you go back and look at previous event management plans and specifically any debrief points, or for our American colleagues, after action reviews? But look at those, produce an event profile. Some venues would have a separate crowd profile, but in our case, event management profile, event profile, crowd profile, call them what you will, but that is the starting point to start to identify key threats for your events. And just give some thought as to how you do that, or how you could do that. And if you want to have a blank piece of paper, look under section 2 of the Purple Guide, and it will go through this in far, far more detail. We do run planning events courses where we spend a day going through this. So I've summarized that in about 25 seconds. So we'll move forwards. So the threat assessment for our coronation events. So the threat assessment nominally, this is a notional threat assessment, but it will read very similar to those that have been circulated for live events this weekend. First thing to say is the UK threat level remains at substantial. That means an attack is likely. Second point is the coronation is of international significance. Now, whatever your view on this, and there's been various polls this week relating to different population demographics, the interest in the royal family, but whichever way you look at this, whether you are a Republican or a loyalist, 2 billion people worldwide will watch this event. 2 billion people worldwide will watch the event. It will probably be the most watched event this year on TV. Publicly accessible locations hosting significant events could be targeted with no notice. I've put the word significant here because here I'm talking about large cities, big towns, crowded spaces, iconic venues. The threat to an event in a tiny village, in a tiny rural shire, will be different to a larger event in a multicultural city. So public accessible locations, significant events could be targeted with no notice. The most likely threat from terrorism is from low complexity, low sophistication attacks with edge weapons or blunt trauma weapons, IEDs, vehicles, firearms, or combinations of those. So the low complexity stuff, just like we discussed a few minutes ago. Protect UK, which is another website I'll show you in a second, has provided specific guidance on the event. That's another go-to site. So remember the MPSA website. Protect UK is another website you can go on to. There are regular Wednesday morning free CPD sessions. If you just type Protect UK in your search engine, where they go through the full website and the app that supports it. And what we're saying here is our organisers, which for this is going to be us as a team, should work with their local authority and other agencies to plan for events that are taking place in their publicly accessible locations. So a little montage here of threat guidance, just to summarise the different threat levels. The picture on the right is taken from the Protect UK app, and it goes through the 5 levels. Wherever you operate in the world, there's generally between 4 or 5 different levels. In the UK, we go from low, moderate, substantial, severe, and critical. We're currently at substantial, which means an attack is likely. One of the key things, or a couple of key messages for CT and protective security: Firstly, you'll often hear me say, the absence of intelligence does not mean an absence of threat. Not seen doesn't mean not there. So the fact that your local police service or the counterterrorism network have not got any intelligence for your large event very much does not mean there is not a threat. So absence of intelligence doesn't mean there's an absence of threat. Key message for you. Second thing is complacency. Complacency and a mindset that it could not happen here. Terrorism can happen right where you are sitting now in your local city and town. What will make it more or less likely is the vital ingredients that we're discussing today. So Protect UK, look at your attack levels, if you like, your threat levels. We're currently at substantial. We've been substantial, severe or critical since 2004. Most of that period has been at severe. It means an attack is highly likely. And for 2 periods in 2017, we were at critical. The top left is the MI5 website. That might surprise you. Security services have got their own website. All these threats are on there. And if you squinted and looked in, that would show you the recent case history of date against threat level. Then the bottom left, which is a nice slide because it shows all the different UK intelligence community. All of those icons and websites have their own websites that you can use. And it also shows the threat from terrorism to the UK and also from Northern Ireland related terrorism. The Northern Ireland related terrorism in Northern Ireland is currently at severe. So that slide has been on there for a month or so. It changed recently, but they are your threat levels. Just as an aside, again, we do run counter-terrorism courses, but just as a guidance as to how the national threats are set, there's 4 criteria. They are set, first of all, by the Joint Terrorist Analysis Centre, which is, if you like, a multi-agency partnership of the whole UK intelligence community. And what they're looking for is, first of all, is known intelligence regarding terrorist threats. So intelligence that they possess from all of their various sources, included international collection plans. The second and third are sort of linked, and they are the capability and the intent of our known terrorist groups. So look at the intelligence, look at the capability and the intent. And the final category is the immediacy or the timeliness of threat. And out of those 4 criteria, we get a generic UK threat assessment. That is the starting point for our threat methodology. It doesn't relate to a specific event. It's 24/7 across the UK, a general threat level. If you go into a Protect UK website, you'll see response levels. So when the UK threat is at substantial, if you look at the response level, it should be heightened, which means us as event planners and managers, we should have additional and sustainable protective security measures. We are still at a high level of threat. So you should be looking for additional and sustainable and augmenting what you have in place already. I've mentioned Protect UK website. You can go onto the home screen on your computer screen. If you haven't already registered, because you can then access their training, such as the Action Counters Terrorism training, free to air, have a go at that. It gives you an insight in the stuff we're talking about today. But also you can see there that all the various information is on there. And on their news section, you will see that there's specific toolkit guidance that relates to the coronation. So if we were planning the coronation at a real event, we would go on there and get the messaging. If you are involved in counter-terrorism operations or any operations this weekend in your cities, town squares, just let me know if you've used this guidance. And if you haven't, take a quick look now, because there's some really simple security-minded communications that you can follow. So before we go into, if you like, the methodology and our location of leads, I want to talk about some academic research under situational crime prevention, vulnerability and security. Now, situational crime prevention is the academic body of research and policing evidence base that looks at, if you like, target hardening and targeting vulnerability and targeting crime. It's fascinating. The book you can see on the right is the only book I'm recommending that you actually pay for today if you are interested in terrorism, and it's from Newman and Clark 2006, and it's Outsmarting the Terrorists. I've got a vast array of terrorism books, but this is a nice one that goes through the situational crime prevention methodology. And what they've done, based on research of terrorist attacks and terrorist debriefs, is come up with an acronym that spells out just like this. They would present an opinion to you that terrorists will seek to look at locations that are exposed, first of all. So is your location, is your venue exposed? Can it be accessed? They'll look at seeing if the venue or part of the overlay infrastructure or personnel is vital to that venue or vital to that operation. The terrorists will look at a location that's iconic from their point of view and general worldview. So ideally, if you mount an attack on London Bridge or by Big Ben, that will be recognised around the world on the headlines the next day. If you mount an attack in Streatham High Street, if I'm sat in Australia, I wouldn't have the first idea where that was. So iconic locations are often targeted by terrorists because they help some of their message. Now, specifically, again, if we were doing a counter-terrorism course here, we'll talk about the end game of Islamic extremism, and they generally seek to kill, proclaim, and die. That's their attack methodology. So kill people quickly, proclaim their message, through the media, and then seek martyrdom. And iconic locations help them because there's media interest and media publicity for that. The next thing they look at is the target from their point of view legitimate? Now, one of the things we talk about is safety, security, and service, and looking at the event through different lenses. We very much have to look at your venue through the eyes of a terrorist and a criminal, and put your minds into how they think and how they plan. And so their warped ideology, their distorted worldview, their noxious sort of influences, if you like, to quote the Manchester Arena report, will influence their target methodology. So the first part of the acronym is evil. The second part they consider is, can they destroy some or all of your venue or target? They very much want to target a venue that's occupied by people because people are generally their targets. They want to have a target that is near to where they live, operate, or associate. The near category has the highest research weighting. So this is one of the key proponent parts. So most terrorist attacks happen generally within transport distance of where the terrorists live, operate, or can get to. And then easy targets. They generally target easy targets to which they can plan and mount their attacks. And this is general terrorism, different groups. So Al-Qaeda, for example, who are still in the background, they go through long planning cycles. They go through more audacious plots such as 9/11 or New Year's Eve celebration targets. This is your run-of-the-mill, low complexity terrorist mindset. Then people who've served in criminal justice will recognize the problem analysis triangle. And for situational crime prevention, if we look at the offender, the location, and the victim, and if we control any of those three component parts, the offence can't take place. So if we know there's an offender, and it's a terrorist offender, hopefully there's operations against them. If we know there's a risk to our location, we put measures in place that are proportionate and flexible. If we've got a victim or potential victims, we protect them by taking mitigating action and just concentrating on those. And then within situational crime prevention, there are 25 recognised tactical options based over 5 different pillars of operation. I won't bore you with those now because we haven't got the time, but just think that there's 5 key themes, 25 options. They're all in that book. And evil done is how terrorists plan and operate. And if you understand that, you can understand how you can start to conduct a vulnerability assessment. And then when we look at things like this today, you can see that Charlie Hebdo, top left, that would have been exposed. It would have been legitimate from their point of view. It would have been iconic from their point of view. Boston Marathon, bottom left, April the 15th, 2013, exposed location. The finish line's vital. It's iconic. It was Patriots Day. It ticks off all of evil done. You may recognise Nice, July the 14th, 2016. You may recognise Paris, bottom right. But all these locations are ticking off some or all of evil done acronyms. The UK counter-terrorism academic research has also looked at evil done this year, and deep in the detail of Protect UK, you'll see a research trial that looked at a different acronym called TRACK. Again, it's not a full course today, but TRACK stands for something that's quite similar to evil done, and it just adds value to this methodology. So planning and tactical coordination. Let's imagine we've been invited to a planning meeting. Let's just park the bus back about February this year. Let's say we're going to a local authority planning meeting in Leeds, and let's say that we are operating in our current roles or responsibilities. Just in the chat, start to put the type of people you would expect to see going to a planning meeting. And again, Chrissy, I'll just look for you to shout out with who they would expect to be at planning, chairing, attending a planning meeting or a series of meetings.
Yep, no problem. So we have
who do we think would be chairing?
Guest.
Sorry, I cut across you out. Chrissy, go again.
We have police and ambulance services, council.
Yeah, always a popular one, police, fire and ambulance, but not necessarily or often indeed the planner or the event organizer. So who else would we expect to see?
So we have event owners, landowners, EM planner.
Great stuff. And just give me a few more.
Stewarding, environmental health, police, ambulance again. We've got the local councillors, security, licensing authority, all the stakeholders.
Perfect. And I'll thank you for getting involved, folks. I'm pretty much, you've got quite a comprehensive list there. Key messages are, the picture to the right is taken from the National Protective Security Agency Protective Security Management System. It's a wordy thing, I know, but there's a full doctrine on this. But it talks about plan, do, check, act, which is a recognised planning cycle. But in summary, who we would expect to attend a meeting would be following the risk management model. And this current risk management model is a one-page illustration of how we do protective security in the UK. So we start off with risk assessment. We look at physical features. We look at active measures. And this is to the left of the incident. And then we look at how we respond, recover and intervene. So that's our general strategic approach taken from the Protect UK website. But who we would expect to attend, it's not exhaustive, and I think we've probably covered all these. There should be event organizer or event organizers and or a promoter, maybe one and the same people, the local authority, the licensing body, the safety advisory group if you're operating in the UK, a community safety partnership. Most big cities have community safety partnerships or neighborhood, safety teams, a safety officer or event manager, the person who's going to run the private sector event management operation. Emergency services, police, fire and ambulance as relevant. The scope and scale of the operation will inform how many attend. The role I mentioned that I used to do, which was a counter-terrorism security coordinator, that role provides operational advice to minimise, manage and mitigate risks at events and operations. It is different to a counter-terrorism security advisor, a CTSA. CTSAs provide more long-term sustainable advice to venues, stadiums and locations, do different training. So they're separate roles, but they do tend to come often side by side. But if you hear CTSECO or CTSA, they are those key roles from within the police service. Military, if there's going to be military operations, events, ceremonial events, stewarding managers, if you can get them, or area managers, key building security management, if you can get them, they're really valuable people, transport services, communications, other agencies. And then the picture here is taken from the Sports Ground Safety Authority, the SGSA Supplementary Guidance 03 from last year on event safety management. I like this slide because it goes through a sequential, logical, virtuous cycle of planning. And you can see there the activity. So you start off on the top left corner by going through those planning activities. You work through the event, you go through the event debrief, you review the event, evaluate and start to plan again. So that's Event Safety Management 03 is a really useful reference source, and it underpins the green guide that you may have seen. So purple and green guide, take a look at those. And then again, as another illustration from that guide, very much promotes Zone X. Now, Zone X or grey space or the last mile in the UK or the last kilometre in France is the area in and around your venue, stadium or public space, and it's often missed. So cast your mind back to the Manchester Arena inquiry. Volume 1 spoke about the contested space outside of the foyer of the arena in the public ticket office, the interface with the Victoria Station and the city centre as being contested space. What we do is when we're planning an operation of scale, if it's an international major sporting event, we look at the host country, the host city, the host venue, and the last mile coordination, all as one layered operation. In the UK, for a standard operation, we should be looking at the host city plans and the host venue plans. Something such as the coronation, there will be consistent guidance, and Protect UK will be your starting point. But you're not just planning for a line in the sand, a fence on a wall, or a street junction. Think about the host city, host venue approach, and think about the last mile and all the different agencies that you can see there in that chart as an illustration for a typical generic football stadium. So then let's get back to our event. And we're doing great for time, by the way, so there's plenty of time for your interaction. So let's consider our event in Leeds. And I'm interested now what you think the most likely threats are. So I've given you a general threat briefing. Identify and analyse and prioritise the key threats to the event. And then also consider other threats and hazards. Now, I appreciate there's a whole lexicon of terms in risk management and risk assessment and health and safety. But when I say a threat, I mean a human-born threat. So think of terrorism, serious crime, direct action protests. When I say hazards, think about health and safety, slip, trip, fall, bad weather, stadium collapse, etc. And just tell me what you think are the most likely threats and hazards for our weekend of events. And if you say terrorism, tell me the type of terrorism as well, if you could. And again, Chrissy, fantastic help today. Thank you. Can you just let me know what they're saying in the chat box?
Yeah, of course.
I know terrorism will come up, but I'm interested in types and also other types of threats as well.
So we have Paul here saying environmental demos.
Yeah, excellent. But also for this one, think about the genre. Think about Republic, which is an anti-monarchy protest. There's protest too, but yeah, protest as well. Thank you.
Yeah, we have another one here saying protest. We have one saying crushing.
Yeah, crushing, says, crowd management, excellent.
We have MTA, VAW, PBID. I'm afraid I don't know what those mean.
So a mass casualty attack or a marauding terrorist attack, an MTA or an MCA. Yeah, a PBID, person born in improvised explosive device. And I think you also said a VBID?
It was a VAW.
A vehicle as a weapon attack. Okay, so some practitioners in the audience. So, okay, so different types of terrorist vehicles, explosive, etc.
We have another one here saying vehicles. We have blades and liquids.
Yeah, liquids. For liquids, also think of fire as a weapon, potentially too.
We have adverse weather conditions.
Thank you. Often missed, but the UK, certainly between June and late August, sometimes in May, we do have periods of hot weather that can lead to thunderstorms and rapid down floors, and obviously wind as well. But yeah, extreme weather often missed. But think of things like the Board Festival in Newquay being cancelled a few years ago and other events. It's more likely as we do go through climate change, whatever your opinion on the scientific validation, the climate is changing. More and more events are being disrupted and some are being cancelled. So yes, weather as well. But okay, so we've got quite a list there. And the reason I do that is to say that we should have an integrated approach to risk management. So whilst we'll be talking about, Martin's Law, Protect Duty, counter-terrorism, we should look at all threats and hazards together through a risk management process. And what's key to yourselves is understanding that process. Most risk assessment methodology has a likelihood chart and a severity or consequence chart. And if you go on the Health and Safety Executive website, if you've done an IOSH course or an NBOSH course, they'll spend a long time going through the methodology. So likelihood times consequence, you'll often have a low, medium, high, a scale of 1 to 3, or even better, a scale of 1 to 5, and you can then get a qualitative or a quantitative score. And this isn't a risk assessment course today. I'm going to try and keep this to about a minute or so. What we would suggest is, as well as the likelihood and the consequence, is to look at vulnerability. So for our suite of planning for an event, we understand the national threat. We look at the event and crowd profile. We start to look at the threats to our specific event. We look at the type of events and the likelihood, the vulnerability and the consequence. And by giving them a score of 1 to 5, 1 to 5, 1 to 5, you can get a score of anywhere between, I guess, 0 and 125. This chart here is taken from our Interpol International Sport Safety and Security course, where all of our commanders just throw their ideas down from around the world. And you can see here that crowd management at a crowded space event generally scores the highest and normally comes the top. followed by public disorder, alcohol, etc. Now, we're less likely to see public disorder and extreme alcohol and drugs at the coronation event because of the crowd profile. But this is just a generic example of how you can categorize threats and hazards with some methodology. And you can see you can work down there into structural collapse and terrorism and even types of terrorism. And I've just taken a few examples. This list can be as long and comprehensive as you need it to be. But think about vulnerability assessments to specific attack types. So where we've mentioned vehicles and knives and IEDs, look at the vulnerability, because that will inform your protective security planning. And then whatever methodology you use, so the right-hand side is taken from the Joint Emergency Services Interoperability Principles, JSIP, and it goes through a process of conducting a risk assessment. That builds on the Health and Safety Executive Risk Management Model. That's a 5-stage process that you probably all recognize in terms of looking for and identifying risks. When you identify a risk, evaluate who may be harmed and how, consider your control measures, record your findings and review. That is a standard international model. The one to the top left is sort of saying the same thing. So identify, analyze, evaluate and treat. But this is ISO 31000, which is the international standard for risk management, which is quite a large document. But this picture here illustrates that process. We teach this to our international commanders because it's an internationally recognized program. But also the top grey box is the key one. This establishes the scope, context and criteria. For that box, think about that's your event profile. That's your crowd profile. That is the unique USP for your event that you use to identify your risks. When you've identified them, analyze them and evaluate them, which is your vulnerability processes, treat them, which is your planning process, make a record of that, monitor and review, which means it's a continuous process and not just a one-off activity, and then communicate and consult. If you follow that process, whatever risk management process you use, you will have a systematic, proportionate, and more importantly, a justifiable process. And then the bottom one we use, again, in our courses, is when we're looking at events, we like to talk about the venue, the crowd, the event and staff, and then think about what is unique. And from that uniqueness, how does that change our threats and risks accordingly? So if you imagine a football stadium, let's take Wembley Stadium in the UK. Now, generally that hosts international football matches. Now, the crowd profile and the crowd dynamics of an international football match are different to a music event or an NFL match taking place at the same venue. So whilst the venue might be the same, the staff might be the same, the crowd and event profile will change. And by going through this process, you get away from key risks and hazards that have happened. I can think of specific examples where football stadiums have hosted a music event and the profile of a music event has caught them out. Or another good example is football stadiums have hosted a large boxing fixture and things have gone awry. So really do think about your event management processes. And this is a key activity for you. Now back to Leeds. I said to you that Leeds was notional, and this presentation I'm doing today, I also delivered back in February for the Security Institute Counter-Terrorism Special Interest Group. And there may be some members online today. And if you are, I apologize. You've pretty much seen a very similar presentation. But this is interesting because when I do a very shallow open source review of Leeds, you can see there have been experienced cases this year where people have been arrested for terrorism offences, both extreme right-wing and Islamic extremism. You can see where there is specific protest threat guidance from Republic. You can see that there's government guidance, and you can see a specific plot where Leeds St James Hospital was targeted. And that's why I spoke to you about the fact that when Eid al-Swalmi targeted the event in Liverpool back on November 14th, 2021, it may not have been the Cathedral and Remembrance Day. It may have been the hospital being targeted, because we've since had Mahmoud Farouk, who's been charged with offences, arrested from the hospital in possession of a 13-kilogram homemade pressure cooker improvised explosive device. So pressure cooker devices are normally left and place devices. So think of the Charnev brothers in Boston Marathon back in 2013. They placed in sequence 2 pressure cooker devices at the finish line, synced to detonate when the main flow of crowd was coming past the finish line. and they cause carnage. The only error they made was siting the pressure cookers at ankle height rather than knee or waist height, which would have led to mass fatalities. So pressure cookers are viable. This was a large one with a fuse. He also had a possession of a really good quality imitation 9mm pistol that indicates to me that he was going to seek martyrdom by placing a device, presenting a pistol. He would have got himself shot. Not saying here that that hospital was the target. He worked at the hospital. He had conducted hostile reconnaissance at a number of military sites in the East Midlands and east of the UK, but he had this equipment at work in a hospital where he worked at the time of arrest. So it's just interesting, and this happened in Leeds, so it adds to the dynamics of our event that we're focusing on. It's good mind-focusing stuff. So getting in then to the second hour, if you like, of the scenario of the presentation today, how we go about setting up a protective security plan. Now, we consult in this area around the world on major projects, and actually you can produce the most lengthy, detailed document that sometimes, in a bid can be hundreds of pages long, just covering these very simple principles. I shouldn't really tell you this because obviously you can go away and steal all our trade secrets, but in essence, when you start off with your plan, think about your national risk assessments. And there's a montage there of UK, American, and different European risk assessments. And generally, they are all available free of charge online. And we've got lots of good methodology. So start off with understanding your national security threats. Secondly, the bit that we have to get into, and this is where we work together as event professionals, is understand the event itself through the event profile and the crowd profile, but then understand the event threat assessment, which is the most likely reasonable worst case scenarios towards your event, the threat assessment, what type of hazards and threats, and then the venue vulnerabilities. So we don't just say, well, our Millennium Square may be targeted by a vehicle. We actually say, well, who might target us? Why? What sort of vehicle? And then go into the vulnerabilities of the vehicle dynamic assessment, the vehicle approach path. Will there be vehicle exclusion or vehicle inclusion? I could go on for hours on this, and there's probably people like Russ Phillips who's online today, possibly, who does this for a full-time role. But actually, this is a vulnerability assessment as part of an attack methodology. Look at security by design. So what measures are already in place? So most city centres have, or a lot of city centres now have hostile vehicle mitigation, looking like a variety of different things. Most city centres will have comprehensive CCTV, AMPR, and other measures. So look about security by design. Look at how we integrate the security, the safety, and the service. We can't just see security as being its own facet of operations. We have to integrate. It has to be interoperable. And for those of a certain age who can remember Blackadder Series 3 back in the 90s or 80s, Blackadder very much says security is not a dirty word. He goes on to say crevice is a dirty word, but security is not. If you're a certain age, you probably recall that sketch. But then you look at flexible, scalable, and proportionate security plans. So what we would advise at Wembley or the O2 would be different to what we would advise at Wickham Stadium, or a small music venue. But flexibility, scalable, and proportionate plans really important for you. Now, I've mentioned integrated safety, security, and service. Does anybody know why I keep going on about this? Just see if anyone gets in the chat box, Chrissy. So I keep mentioning safety, security, and service. I'm very passionate about this, by the way. But does anyone know if there's a legal doctrine that sits behind this? Just give it a few seconds to see if anyone's heard this before.
Yeah, I'll let you know now.
Looks like we've forgotten or didn't know. But if you didn't know, there is a Council of Europe Convention, COE, on integrated safety, security and service at football and other sporting events. So whilst you may think that's football stuff, Pete, what you've got there is international doctrine and law that's been signed by over 100 countries to say that they recognise the need to combine integrated safety, security and service. Safety here, you can see health and safety, security, terrorism, crime, service, making sure our spectators feel comfortable, accepted and welcome. And that's really important. By integrating those, you get an integrated approach. If you want to host the European Championships 2024, 2028, the World Cup or the Olympics, As part of the bid criteria, you sign at your head of government level to say that you're going to integrate safety, security and service, first of all, and deploy all of your national asset and take international advice. So that's why it's so important, legal doctrine. So whilst it applies to sporting events, we teach and train and consult this to apply to any event. So there's a requirement by law. Secondly, we have to have a link to either the national, the host city or local authority plans. So if we're planning for Millennium Square, what are the plans for the city centre? Are there already evacuation plans or counter-terrorism plans? The answer to that will, of course, be yes. Are there venues in and around that venue? Have they got plans? Generally, yes. And then seek to look at those plans. There are advantages of interoperability between events management, police, fire, ambulance, and all the agencies. But there's also a legal obligation under the Civil Contingencies Act 2004 in the UK and also JCIP. So advantages of, but interoperability, a legal requirement, absolutely essential. Take a look at volume 2 of the Manchester Inquiry and just see the commentary across those 15 or so chapters of how this didn't operate as it should have done and how much learning there is from that one debrief. There should be a correlation between the event management plan, which is generally private sector, owned by an organiser, linked to reasonable foreseeable contingencies for crowd management, structural failure, fire, missing people, all that sort of stuff. But that should link into the incident response and emergency service plans. And then the guidance I mentioned to you, so where I spoke about the integrated safety, security and service, FIFA ground regulations, you can get them free of charge online, talks about this. Green Guide talks about this. The opening paragraph in the executive summary, paragraph 1 of the Green Guide, talks about integrated safety, security and service. Bottom left, if you're interested in the American World Cup, in fact, I just slapped myself on the wrist, the American, the Mexican and the Canadian World Cup in 2026, their bid book is online. Their whole chapter on safety, security and service is online. You can read it. And then, of course, Olympics and UEFA guidance. So this isn't just stuff we talk about because we want to, all based on solid evidence and evidence-based practice. So we then go into an event management team. So what we would say for this is, first of all, our event management should be multi-agency in approach. We should have roles and responsibilities. The picture on the left just shows a typical event management team for a normal event, and we can scale that up and we can scale it down. We should look at capability and resilience, especially where the event scales and flexes over a number of days. We should look at planning integration, a series of planning processes that are project managed by all the agencies. We don't just have one planning meeting, it's a range of meetings, sub-meetings, recce's and visits that are coordinated. Interoperability is our watchword. Who makes the key decisions and what are transfers of command, TOCs, between event management and police, fire and ambulance, and how are they made, when are they made, who authorises it, who makes key decisions on things such as an evacuation or a lockdown or a shelter in place, to borrow American terminology, but who makes those decisions? And these are things that we should consider and talk through in advance. And again, on full courses, we spend hours going through this. We look at types of contingency, types of response. We look at, if you like, a slow build response to a contingency. We look at a sudden bang, flash bang incident, and we also look at a rising tide and then look at different responses. But to summarize those things, there's really 4 levels. The first thing is you've got an event management plan, something happens, that was predictable, you respond to it, you resolve it, you carry on with the event. So an example would be a missing person, you expected it, you planned for it, you resolved it. The second layer would be something happens, it was predictable and foreseeable, so you've got a contingency plan. So you activate your contingency plan, you manage the situation, and you resolve and continue with your event with no changes. The third level is something more serious happens, you operate a contingency plan, and because of that, part of your event, the schedule, the location has to be altered, changed or amended. And the final one is what you don't want to have, something so significant happens, there's a transition from event management to incident response, and actually full emergency plans are operated and the event is cancelled, postponed or doesn't take place. Those 4 levels are your key thinking processes against reasonable criteria. Now, what you have in your contingency plans are all nicely outlined in the purple guides or the green guides. So there's methodology you can use and templates that you can follow. And just a quick summary here for your event control room or venue operations center. You'll have different names for this. Make sure it's large enough for all of your partners. Are there separate briefing rooms, integrated communications? Do you have mapping systems, GIS, instant response systems? There's so much tech at the moment we can use. Do you have access to the operational handbook, the event management plan and contingencies? Are they hard copies? Are they electronic copies? Are they signed copies? Do you have operational security? Again, we can spend hours on this, but then just make sure your facility is suitable. Make sure you've got contingency for a backup or a secondary ECR, and also think about access control or security, because these venues, as we all know, become very popular T-spots and good places to hang out. So if you're managing an event, just think about some of these key factors. And just thinking back, so I've mentioned safety, security and service. Big shout out to Marcel Altenberg from last week. Fascinating presentation. And for me, the strength of this program of events is you'll see different subjects every few weeks. They might on first sight appear different, but they are all linked. So when I'm thinking about security, although I come from a crowd management background, when I think about security and counterterrorism, I also think about crowd management. And I think about the great work from Professor Keith Still. This is a book you may want to buy. It's quite cheap on Amazon. And as Marcel said last week, all of this theory and academic research comes from this and other books like it. So things I'll think about is a ramp assessment. So the routes, the area, the movement, the profile, because those routes taken by the crowds are also routes that are going to be exploited and targeted by terrorists or threat actors. I'll think about the design, the information, the management, and then the ingress, circulation, and the egress of my events, all key phases operating over layers. I'll think about crowd dynamics, the speed, density, flow rates, where, when, how, because crowded spaces are congested spaces and they are targets. I'll think about congestion mapping. So on the systems that I would use, I will map out congestion. I will use red, amber, and green. If I know the density is assumed or actual, I'll put them in there. And finally, I'll look at decision controls. So the crowd science, these 5 tools that you can do on your level 5 course or your master's course, you'll go for these 5 tools. They apply to security, they apply to service, they apply to crowd safety. And thanks again to Marcel for giving his time last week and some good information there to build on. But when you read any of the 200 plus fatal crowd incidents that happen pretty much every month all around the world, any review, the findings are consistent. And there's normally a phrase that's something like this. All too often there's a culmination of factors magnified by incompetence or negligence, contributing towards too many people in too small a place. And then to quote the barristers who paid an awful lot of money, such incidents are predictable. Now, I don't necessarily agree with the second part of this, but they would say, if a situation is predictable, it's therefore preventable. I don't subscribe to that, but that is a position that legal barristers will take for crowd incidents and public inquiries. But in simple terms, too many people, too small a place, it should have been obvious, it's happened before, why is it still happening? If we plan to use these 5 tools, it shouldn't happen. So just a shout out. And if you want to go into the Purple Guide, chapter 13 is the place to get all this information on that. We've spoken about layers of security. Any security plan, any security practitioner will talk to you about a layered plan. We use the analogy about a sofa to seat experience, and see this in the mind of one of your customers who decides to come to your event. What they will normally do is, from the comfort of their sofa, go online, go on your website, get some information and decide if they're going to travel to your event, buy a ticket and do that. When they've done that, they will then plan their journey. They will travel to the host city. If it's an international tournament, they'll travel to the host country, but they'll travel to the host city. Very often they'll experience cultural activities, festivities, as well as the sport or the event. They'll go to a stadium, pass through the last mile, go to a fan zone, wash, rinse, repeat, and go home again. It's the sofa to seat experience. But we also look at this from a terrorist point of view and from our point of view. At each layer, what can we put in place to manage, mitigate, and minimize risks? Any guidance document anywhere in the world emphasizes these points. The CPNI or NPSA, as they're called now, talk about 5 layers. So when we're planning events, look beyond the perimeter. That is your host city approach. Look at measures at the perimeter. Look at measures on site, in the venue, and key assets. Key assets are normally people, information, or property. People always come first. And in those 5 layers, looking at different methods from which your basic plan, these 5 responders are to deter, detect, delay, mitigate, and respond to threats. Now, we teach this around the world to law enforcement professionals and private sector. If you go to the United States, they will have slightly different terminology and words, ditto in Australia or in Europe, but there's normally 5 layers and 5 principles. This is taken from the FIFA and UEFA guidelines. Again, you'll see here, coincidentally, 5 layers. So if you went to Doha last year for the World Cup, or if you're going to go to France for the Olympics, these 5 recognised layers are followed. Layer 1 being the public zone, the host city. Layer 2 being fan zones, activation sites. Layer 3, ideally being an additional security perimeter. Layer 4 being your inner security perimeter. Layer 5 being the venue. And if you're operating at a football stadium, you'll see the colour code, blue, green, red and yellow. And blue is normally the VIP or West aspect of the stadium. And once you understand these 5 layers, you can then build in a spatial and temporal plan. So layers of geography and layers of timing. So for an event that starts, at a weekend, how much planning time, how much security time you're putting in advance. So back to our event in Leeds, we can see these layers of security. We will go through and talk about how we develop an integrated plan. And for this, Chris, you just confirm I'm swiping left now.
Yeah, I can see the page is turning here.
Document. So not that one. Can you see a new map?
I can see the map there, yeah.
So this is a system that I use extensively. It's called OnePlan. It's a 2D and 3D mapping system. And on this, literally, I can do anything. If I press this top left button, it would show you the whole suite of events and operations I've been involved in, from World Cups literally down to an event in a street. But what I've done here is I've mocked up a plan of Leeds. So if you remember, I showed you Google Mapping Pro. You can use that. And indeed, back in the day, I planned events from Google Map Pro or PowerPoint, and it was a complete nightmare. The reason I like OnePlan, and I started to use this with Paul Foster, the CAO, as part of our Interpol training back in 2019, is because it's a single source of truth and we can put everything in one place and work collaboratively. So in the plan of Leeds, for example, let's just take a quick tour. We've got our venue and all these features. I can put pictures in. So hopefully, Chris, you can see a picture pop up.
Yeah, that's working.
Yeah, so we can put pictures and videos from your planning. We've got areas. So Millennium Square and Leeds, if you're a crowd practitioner, you'll see the total to the right. It's 3,600 square metres. So at 2 persons per square metre, that will hold just over 7,000 people. The box on the right, I can change the density of crowd and that will change the formula for you, which is really simple. I can do math to a high level, but actually I don't need to. I can then put amber layers of crowd, so higher density areas, and check those. I can put infrastructure. So here, for example, I've got a pedestrian screening area or a mag and bag area, and you can see that SIA contracted. I can put an entrance width, and you'll see the entrance width there. I've put 6 meters, 1.5 meter lanes. From that, of course, I can do flow rates. I can put pedestrian entrances. The dots are people. So when I clock, yellow here are security industry authority, green are event stewards, we've got pink being volunteers, we've got police and behavioural detection officers, so a range of people. We can do things like put the fence and the perimeter. And on this particular one, if I was using Harris fence on the perimeter at 2.5 metre segments, it will tell me how many segments I need and talk into a bill of quantities. I can identify entrances, accesses. I can put bus lanes, I can put arrows. With arrows, I use this for egress being red, ingress being green. I can put the flow rate of ingress, put congestion measures, and put all of these things in place. So we're setting up a plan, and then on the right-hand side here, these are all the layers and functions that I've got deployed on this simple mapping system. I use this for all of my systems. This is in TD. I can share this extensively and use it extensively. But we've got people, the dot planning. We've got infrastructure and overlay and types of tent and everything you can think of, you can place on these maps. We can have different sort of mapping. So if I wanted to, I could go to UK OS mapping, satellite mapping, of course, etc. What you can also do, so when we're working on the World Cup or in stadiums, we can upload CAD plans, which is a game changer. So you can put a CAD plan by layer into this system in 2D, do your dot plans, put your infrastructure. And the beauty is I could be working on this here, and my colleagues are working on this in America. And the moment I move one of these dots or features, it will automatically change on their screen. You'll see we can export and print. That's a whistle-stop tour. I can put things such as hostile vehicle mitigation, type of mitigation on there, and anything you can think of, we can do. Even down to JSIP, lexicon of terms, rendezvous points, and even fire brigade and police vehicles. So there's something there for everybody on this plan. So back to our plan we're going to focus on for our scenarios. This is Millennium Square. So any scenario in Millennium Square, you'll see it's got a Harris fence. It's got access control with 3 main areas. There'll be SIA stewarding searching. There'll be crowd management stewards in green. There are police deployed around the perimeter in blue and different types of police. We've got volunteers. If I just zoom in so you can see the colours, in pink. We've got traffic marshals in purple. So we've got a blended economy of police, fire, ambulance. And when I put police on there, you'll see that I also put type of police. So these officers here are a counter-terrorism armed patrol. So the system has no bounds as to what you can plot, draw and use. This one's taken me about an hour or so to do for this event and will be a briefing aid. So we'll just go back from there into our scenarios now. So when we develop a plan, we talk about people, processes, technology. We talk about the high-level security protection principles of layers and space.
It seems Peter's having
We all get a WhatsApp message based on security-minded communications to say there's been a report of hostile reconnaissance. One of those has been investigated through the Northeast Counter-Terrorism Unit. The clue there means it's quite serious. And it relates to subjects taking photographs of the load-in and build-up phase. Images of those subjects are available. What would you do? So as part of our plan, what do you think measures we can take to counter hostile reconnaissance? And just bullet points. And again, Chrissy, just when somebody gives me an answer, let me know.
I will indeed. Peter, I'm not sure if you had some technical difficulties there a moment ago. I can't see you anymore. Can everyone else here see Peter? Okay, I can see your, yeah, I can see that now.
Yeah, just shout up if it drops off. There's obviously a text somewhere along the line. So hostile reconnaissance, as we're saying, I've just talked that through. So countering it's really important. Think about your disruptive effects, behavioral detection. Think about how you have your partnerships. Think about communications. You've probably all seen these signs. If you've been into a city, you'll see these signs on your transport systems. Think about the freely available training that you can do. So this is scan training. Your counter-terrorism security advisors can help you with this. There are 6 different modules. One training session that hopefully you've all done is the Action Counters Terrorism session through Protect UK. A number of modules there. Takes about an hour. You can get a certificate. This is the baseline awareness training. And also recognize that this is an international policing option. So these are our American colleagues from the Cyber Security and Infrastructure Security Agency. They train the same stuff. If you compare their website to the NSA or others around the world, they're similar, but they talk about the power of hello and talking to people. It doesn't cost you anything. Here is an example of security-minded communications from the Excel site in London. So think about what you can put out on your media. And then the MPSA have got guidance on this. So that's really important for you. Just to skittle through that, what you're trying to do is deny access to your information, detect hostile reconnaissance and deter it. What the terrorist will do is review open source information, of which there is a lot. And at that point, you want them to see your security-minded communications and subliminal messages that are going to deter, detect and disrupt them. They will consider broad target acquisition before they do detailed planning. What we need to do is security-minded communications, effective security partnerships, everyone working together, and behavioural detection. Second response in a scenario for you. It's the Saturday morning. It's 9:25. A steward at the cathedral reports that an unidentified male in dark clothing with a rucksack approached the side.
We discussed a scenario as part of our scenario, if you remember, where a suspicious person had been located near to the cathedral. We posed a question about what our response would be, and in essence, we should be anticipating suspicious persons. Our responses are to detect, track, identify, and respond. Now, using the one plan system that we showed, we can start to look at the type of resource. In this case, we've got a mixture of behavioural detection officers, we've got police officers, we've got armed police officers, we have stewards, SIA, and volunteers. So why wouldn't we put CCTV onto the system to try and detect, track, and identify? And then a proportionate response may be to seek to deploy behavioural detection officers or police officers to do a low-level stop check. If the threat was increased, or if it was honestly believed that that was a suspicious person who posed an immediate threat, the appropriate response may be to send an armed police officer, of which we've got some deployed. They could perhaps challenge from cover and seek to resolve the situation. But the key learning here is add this as a contingency and to make sure that you can respond accordingly. We then spoke about the challenges at the north entrance, so to the north of the Millennium Square. This is predictable, it's preventable. So demand exceeds capacity. We start off by understanding the capacity of our event and working out what the event delivery is going to be and how we're going to model the event, first of all, how we're going to monitor the crowd capacity and manage through observing, controlling, and managing access. So simple things here, we can use PA or VA. We can start to redirect the crowd to the northern sector and move them around to an eastern sector, and then to see if that alleviates the problem. Another challenge was regarding extreme weather. This had featured during our earlier part of the presentation. We should have a plan for extreme weather, winds, for thunderstorms and lightning, because in public space locations, they can have an impact on the resolution and also delivery, and also need to have responses. And if you want to look at a specific case study, take a look at the Indiana State Fair from August 2011, the challenges faced by the American colleagues at what was a predictable extreme weather event in an open domain where a stand and structure fell over, killing 7 people. So key decisions there to think about. If we are going to manage crowds, who are the decision makers? In our plan, we've got level 2 stewards, we've got supervisors, we've got crowd managers, and of course, we've got oversight through CCTV and a system in place because we control capacity to manage and monitor that crowd. Okay, then, so people and property, there's some excellent guidance that you can see. The CPNI, or the National Protective Security Agency, will put guidance on there. But then we talk about the overlay and different tactics we can use. It's quite a specialist subject. But what I'd like to talk about really is when you're managing your search and screening, and when you're looking at safety, security, and service, how do you develop your planning, and what factors do you think would affect the throughput into the crowded space of Millennium Square? Now, the sort of things to think about would be the threat level and the event threat assessment, because that will drive your activity and control the level of search and screening that you do. And when people say search and screening, I like to think about it as screening and search, because actually, if we've got tactics to screen people and we've got a detection policy and we understand prohibited items, and maybe we've got a clear bag policy, we perhaps don't need to search everybody. And the level of search and screening required will be based by the threat assessment and your policies. Think about the crowd and event profile. Think about the capability of people, processes, and your technology. Think about the efficiency of arrival and queuing space. So your system of crowd management. Think about the arrival of the crowd, how much queuing space, the service and delivery time, and that will indicate how quick people will move through your queue system. Lots of theory and academic research on this, but in simple terms, communication, clear planning, think about your dim ice crowd management model and have that as part of your plan. The impact of clothing and bags will impact your throughput. the effectiveness of your pre-event communications and security-minded communications. Effective event websites will very quickly have you from a landing page going to prohibited items, search page, what you can carry, or frequently asked questions. That information will inform your public, and because of that, they can prepare, and because of that, you can have a slicker, more smoother service. And then the infrastructure that you require, whether it's people, processes, and technology. So in short, at a pedestrian screening area or at a public viewing area, think about the overlay and structure. Here's an example from one of the UK's cricket grounds. Think about that. You can see here that dedicated infrastructure, search lanes of certain width, search tables, surrender bins, all that good stuff. And then think about the people. In this picture here, you can see a manager. Ideally, they'd be wearing a reflective jacket or a high-vis jacket. You can see SIA-trained searchers in the search lanes. You can see a search dog. If you are deploying search dogs, understand the capability. Is that a explosive search and detection dog? Is it a drug dog, a firearms dog, a cash dog? But understand that. Best advice, don't tell the public what you're searching for. Just have a picture of search dogs. They provide reassurance, very effective tactic to use. But also remember, the dog will only give you an indication. It's not giving you facts. It's giving you an indication on which you can then enhance and augment your response. So directing your response in these scenarios, and again, we'll join this bit of video clip to the first part of the webinar. So key principles for you. Think about your initial response. What is it in your event management plan that helps you to deliver the initial response by the relevant steward, police officer, or member of teams? Think about effective resourcing. So as part of your initial response, think about the crowd management scenario. You will have crowd management stewards, you will have volunteer stewards, you will have wayfinders. Think about how you then combine additional resourcing. So what if you deploy an extra crowd management team? What if you deploy police officers to support that process? How will that be augmented and integrated into your process? And then think about the specific tactics, ideally in advance through your planning process, asking what if questions, looking at the reasonable worst case scenarios and building your tactics regarding them, and then directing a response to locate, assess and update and take initial action is essential. So think about the capability of your staff. Are they SIA or are they MVQ trained? Think about your event plan. Today I've spoken briefly about one plan, but whichever system you use, have simple gridded mapping that everyone can share, and think about the lowest denominator, which is a steward with an A5 copy folded up in their pockets, but have a consistent mapping that everyone follows. If you're using radios, think about the ABC, accuracy, brevity, clarity. Think about the radio talk groups or channels. Think about how that integrates to your multi-agency command system. Think about who's talking, how they're talking, and any codes that you're going to use. And consider again the impact of the Manchester Arena inquiry, where for about 11 minutes, safety stewards couldn't get through to control room during the the egress phase of the operation, and that suspicious person sighting of Salman Abedi wasn't passed through. So radio is really important. Like to think that at least supervisors have these, ideally everybody. Appreciate there's a cost imperative, but think about your communications. Think about if you're using emergency codes, some example ones here. I'm a big promoter of codes. It helps with ABC of messaging, it helps with security communications, and it also helps with simple messaging. And I also advocate earpieces to radios. I appreciate that not every stewarding agency would do that. We've had conversations before, indeed, on this very forum about code words, these different views. If you ask Pete Dalton, he'll always say, think about simple, consistent messages that everybody follows. And then think about your important emergency messages. This is methane from JSIP. We'll touch on that in more detail in a few minutes' time. And the most important role or rank is your first line supervisor. He or she and they, those supervisors and team leaders will provide oversight, supportive supervision, and direct your response. They are really important. Invest in them and support them. So I've spoken about emergency incident management. In the United Kingdom, we use the Joint Emergency Services Interoperability Principles, JSIP. And here you can see the 5 principles. First of all, co-location across all agencies. is important at a strategic, tactical and operational level. Co-locate your resources, communicate between all agencies, coordinate your activity. And by the way, these are not in a hierarchical order. These should happen not in sequence. There's no particular priority, but they should happen as part of a consolidated package of measures. Jointly understanding the risk, and for that we use the joint decision model, which is the right-hand infogram there. So gather the information, assess the risks, look at your working strategies, consider powers and policies, identify options, take action and review. Police officers, fire, ambulance, military, and now in more cases, private security are using these models. And then shared situational awareness, the methane model that we use gives you an excellent input into that. All this doctrine, all this guidance, again, freely available on the JSIP website. Download the app, use this as part of your structure and embed this into your workplace. It has to be embedded the best way through interoperability and integration and testing and practicing. Use these processes. It will make your response smarter, sharper, slicker, and thereby you'll have safer, more secure events. The Manchester Arena Inquiry Volume 2 is your go-to most recent review of a detailed analysis of the key learning from Manchester, with lots of findings on how a number of failures with regard to JSIP weren't implemented. And from that, you can see the key messages that you need to consider. And then, so we've spoken about Martin's Law at the back end of a recording. So Martin's Law, the Protect Duty, or now indeed as recent as yesterday, the Terrorism Protection of Premises Draft Bill 2023 has been launched. It will create a range of obligations. Now, a couple of key messages. You shouldn't be being sold training that's Martin's Law compliant. People can't give you Martin's Law accredited planning or consultancy at this stage because it's not available. But that doesn't mean to say you shouldn't be always looking at counter-terrorism measures. But whilst we wait the final details, the key things to anticipate is, first of all, the legislation, I think it's section 12 or 13, talks about identifying a responsible person for standard venues or events, but also looking at a designated senior officer, a DSO, for those enhanced protective security plans. So 2 levels of training there that we'll need to have in place. The consultation and the guidance in Protect UK also talks about the competent person in the workplace scheme. That's forecast to be a level 3 course over a week. And then above that, the counter-terrorism specialist security register for consultants, which will be based on academic, operational, previous experience and a portfolio. It will be peer assessed, and that will give you the highest level of support in this area. Make sure that relevant workers is the key phrase in the legislation, have CT training, and that will build from the Action Counters Terrorism app that's free. But what's really important, you'll always hear us say, is make sure that that is managed and translated into the workplace. Think about conducting threat and vulnerability assessments. So at each venue, whether it's a standard or enhanced, look at your event profile, look at the type of terrorist attack methodologies that are relevant to your event, and then look at measures to either prevent or mitigate the terrorist attack. Look at measures that enable you to respond to terrorist incidents and therefore minimize the impact of those. As part of your security plan, there's a separate guidance on that. Your security plan should contain details of how you identify those threats, how you identify the hostile reconnaissance, how you identify the incident, deliver your initial response, how you notify, escalate, warn and inform, and respond accordingly. All key components of a detailed security plan. But again, integrate the safety, security, and service, and then develop a counter-terrorism, proportionate, flexible, and scalable plan that will be different for every event at every venue that seeks to prevent terrorist activity or harm taking place, to minimize the impact, to identify, respond, and notify. And that will help you in delivering, and then testing and exercising that virtuous event management cycle. As I've said, lots of different freely available information, lots of agencies, lots of people will help you. There's forthcoming training at level 3. There are courses available in general counterterrorism. So just make sure you have those processes in place. Now, Martin's Law on the Home Office Protect UK site has a fact sheet that's well worth a read. The legislation came out yesterday, so it's really timely today. And then some key messages here, again, from yesterday.
We've got your...
Apologise for the phone call. Yeah, so key messages there for you: improve security, scale up and provide training as part of Martin's Law or the new legislation. Today I've spoken about the wealth of freely available information. So top left, Protect UK, sign up to that, do the app. There are some Wednesday morning roadshows you can dial into. Top centre, the National Protective Security Authority, formerly named as CPNIA. Follow their website, freely available. There's lots of detail on threat analysis, mitigation and guidance, even down to the detail of specific templates that you can follow. JSIP we've covered, Manchester Arena volumes 1, 2 and 3. Have a read of those. There's some compelling findings and observations. Things like the Sports Ground Safety Authority or the Purple Guide or the supplementary SGSA guidance. Guidance such as the health safety events and health safety in the workplace, HSE documents, freely available, gives you the process to follow. Think about the UK intelligence community. All of these different websites provide freely available information. And that's what we try and do today, is to give you information that you can access, that you can read through, and then speak to people like myself and many, many others who will be always happy to chat through this guidance and policy and procedures and see how we can help to make our events safer. Purple Guide, the apps, and that's all the information for you, which takes me to the end of this presentation. Hopefully, Chrissy can now knit this together and you'll get the full package. And then, as I said, my contact details are the email or LinkedIn. Thank you for your time today. Look forward to working with you all and sharing ideas, and really look forward to future CPD events. Sign up, socialise the media for event insights. Big shout out to Chrissy and Mark Breen at Safer Events. It takes a lot of coordination. And as they always say, volunteer. We're not looking for professional teachers or presenters. Come and share your ideas, support the CPD network. It's invaluable. And thank you again. Hopefully you have safe events, and I look forward to speaking and sharing with you in due course.
And it takes us perfectly on time to a Q&A session for the last 10 to 15 minutes. So Chrissy, any questions we can take? Glad to stay in that now and take any points from the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we had a few coming up throughout the session there. So guys, if you want to type them in on the right-hand side now, Peter will be able to get to them, and we can chat through those for the next. We've got just over 10 minutes left.
Mustafa has asked about getting the presentation later. Yes, of course, the main part that's recorded you can have. And I'll chat to Chrissy offline. We'll find a way of sharing the slides. I verbally talked through the slides we've missed, which was about the crowd management redirect, JSIP principles, and a bit about the new Martin's Law and where we can get information. So we've only missed 4 or 5 slides. Yeah, looking to take any questions from anybody. While you think of questions, always happy to take questions or have a conversation via LinkedIn. Contact me under Pete Dalton on LinkedIn. My email address, Chrissy has got, and we'll circulate. That would have been on the last slide for you to go. So happy to take questions offline, and always happy to share ideas and discuss areas in this field.
Yeah, exactly. And once I do have the recording ready, I'll put it on the Safe Events LinkedIn, and people are free to have conversations in the comments under that. We'll also have it on our Safe Events YouTube page. So Peter, if you click in on the right-hand side here, you'll see Q&A only.
Oh, Simon Roberts, International Safety, Security and Service. Hi, Simon. How are you? I think it's our friend Simon down at the museums. Yes, so that's the convention, the Council of Europe Convention on Integrated Safety, Security and Service at Football and Sporting Events. Council, if you type that in, it'll pop up, and it's also known as the Saint-Denis Convention, signed in 2016, and there's a website for that. So Ian Smith, I've developed a threat analysis model. Is it best to use ISO? Not saying it's best, Ian. All I'm saying is just to have a process that you can stand behind. So if you are operating in the UK and you are part of a review process, if you say, for example, I've used IOSH, I've used NBOSH, I've used the Health and Safety Executive, that is perfectly fine. The key thing is your risk management process has to be systematic and cater for identifying, analysing, evaluating risks. As again, the reason we use ISO 31000 on our Interpol courses is because it's an international standard. So have a process. Level 3, yeah, personal view, I would agree with that, Ian. Level 3 is a low-level qualification. Clearly, the CTSS register will sit above that. And of course, there are other courses that you can do in counter-terrorism. Not doing a sales pitch today, but we do those. Other people like Storm UK do a level 6. You can do a master's degree. But there are people who specialise in this area. But I think what's more important, or equally as important, is integrating that security and safety function. And not only the qualification. So if you are bringing in this sort of advice, check out the background, the CV, the case history of your consultant or your person, and invest in this area. Yeah, Ian mentions again, the police search advisor and the SECO courses are very extensive courses. They are intensive courses, and they're backed up by annual licensing, underwritten by the College of Policing as a portfolio. So people who've gone through CT SECO, Pulsar, CT Search Advisor courses, yes, they'll be highly trained, provided they're maintaining their continued development. Oh, Mark down in Melbourne, nice to see you online. It's either very, very early or very late down in Melbourne for you. So events at Buckingham Palace, yeah, any event, and it's a great point to mention, when you're planning an event that's going to take place this weekend or next weekend or in a month's time, invariably something will happen during your planning cycle. And one of the key things we do under planning and readiness exercising and testing is we develop a plan that's based on the current threat levels, but we also develop plans for an escalation in threat or to respond to a certain incident. So where something happens at Buckingham Palace and it's linked to or in the area, we review that, we pass the information, and we flex and check and scale our plan. So great question, Mark, and nice to see you. Hopefully you're okay down there. The software for crowd calculation, again, not a sales pitch. That's a system called OnePlan. Have a look at that. It's one that I use because I do some consultation work with OnePlan. Only system I use for planning my services now. You can do all the stuff on there. So have a look at that as well, Mustafa, if you want to. There's probably OnePlan employees listening in, and they'll be very, very clear to have a chat to you. But great system to use as well. Courses and websites. I'm not allowed to sell you courses today, Ali. If you send me an email, I'll send you a prospectus from Mind of the Matter Consultancy of all of our events courses, but I'm not going to push courses today. It's a free service. I think that's the sort of the general ground rules. Any more questions? Thanks for those questions, folks. A question from me to you then, I guess. Apart from the tech crashing, which is always a gremlin issue that you have, what's the key learning, or if you could take one or two key things from today, what would you take away and translate into your everyday operations? And I'll just have a quick look at the chat and see what you think. So what have you learned today, if anything? Hopefully you've done something, because you've been here for nearly 2 hours. But what are the key messages you've picked up that you can translate into your operational practice? Hopefully somebody will type something. And the reason we ask this question, again, it goes back to the Manchester Inquiry, sections 1 or chapters 1 and 2, really, which speaks about, you know, the testing and exercising and training is so important. And if you go before any public inquiry for an event, what they will generally do is people like QC Mansfield or, you know, Sir John Saunders will ask you key questions. And those key questions often go like this. First of all, you know, what was your role? And as part of your role, they'll ask you about your training record in terms of operational experience and academic experience, but also how you translate that training into your workplace. At Manchester, the 3 stewards who were subject to detailed scrutiny, they'd done the Action Online package, they hadn't translated it. Hostile reconnaissance, Paul. Yeah, hostile reconnaissance, bread and butter. And the message I would say is terrorists are criminals. Criminals are terrorists. They will give off generally by signs. There's a whole academic research regarding hostile reconnaissance. We used to call it just stereotyping and suspicious behavior. But do that, you know, because if you engage with people and use the power of hello and talk to people, that has a massively reassuring and engaging effect as part of service. But criminals, drug dealers, thieves, terrorists, scammers don't want to be spoken to. So hostile reconnaissance, great. ACT training, Omar, yeah, get people to do the ACT training. The legislation section 13, somebody will correct me in a minute, or 14, talks about the relevant person. My simple take on this is this: anybody involved in event management, whether they are a manager or a safety steward, or anybody should do the Action Counters Terrorism Programme as a baseline, and that should be written into their CPD and documented. Simon Rupp. Yep, following the process, Simon, of course, a systematic process. The protective security management cycle, it goes like we've followed that cycle today. All of these cycles are generally a process where you look at your events, build your profile, do your threat assessment, do your vulnerabilities, write your plans and reviews. In the police service, that's called the National Decision Model. But those processes are really important, and document those. Bart, thank you. So integrate event management into incident response and vice versa. So make sure the plans are lined up. Interoperability, thank you, Ali. Yes, there's some good stuff there. So I'm now reassured that at least some of you have learned some stuff today, which makes my time well spent. Chrissy, any questions we've missed?
I think you kind of got everything there. I suppose I just wanted to say thanks to yourself, Peter. That was really, really interesting. The moments when you were logged off there, I was asking our attendees here how they were finding it, and we had some great feedback there. So people have been really, really happy with this. And thanks to everyone watching as well for your patience with the technical difficulties. We've got just under 3 minutes now before we do all actually get kicked out. So I'll wrap it up now while I can. And as I said, yes, we will have the full recording up on YouTube on Friday. I'll also send a link to that to everyone who registered here, so you'll be able to see it there. And I'll have a chat with Peter here about how we can get those slides as well, so everyone can see those if they want them to.
If need be, Chrissy, I'll just pre-record this end, those last 4 slides, and send you a clip, and you can maybe your tech people just knit them together.
Yeah, that sounds perfect.
Yeah, but the prize goes to Mark Oxman from Melbourne, Australia. He was a person who has to be the first away.
Yeah, well done. We actually had quite a bit from all over the world. I saw people, we have Nigeria, we have Netherlands, we have different parts of Europe, different parts of the Middle East, and then of course Australia staying up very late tonight to join us. So thanks for everyone for coming along. As I said, I'll get that email out to you before the end of the week, and you'll have all the links. And thanks again, Peter. That was absolutely fantastic.
Perfect. Look forward to seeing you all soon, and do connect via LinkedIn or send an email. Glad to talk to you all.